So, this lecture is going to focus on color mixing. My goal is to teach you how to use a split primary approach to creating a color wheel. This will allow you to mix a myriad of colors with just having a few basic colors in your kit. And the key is, instead of having a single version of each of the primaries, red, yellow, blue, you're going to have two of each. And for instance, I'm going to have a cadmium yellow, which leans towards orange, right? And a lemon, or sometimes known as Hansa yellow, that leans towards green. Same thing with red. We've got a warmer red that leans towards orange and a cooler red that leans towards violet. And a greenish blue called phthalo blue, green shade, and a violet blue called ultramarine blue. By splitting the primaries, you're going to get a much more successful range, a much more accurate ability with your colors to capture those more vibrant colors when you need to, and also more muted, more natural colors. So let's get started. Basic tools, you're going to need a color wheel. Essentially what you're going to try to do is match this for accuracy as best you can, right? You're going to want to have, a good brush, softer brush for this project typically works best if you're trying to lay down smooth strokes. And a palette knife really helps as well. Good idea to have a paper towel. A wet paper towel really helps. Have some water to clean your brushes. It's a good idea if you're working with acrylic to have a spray bottle handy to keep your colors from drying out on the palette. Of course, it's good to have tubes of paint, like I just mentioned to you. This is actually palette paper that I'm working on, but any palette will do. And of course, for your purposes, you're not going to have to lay things out like I am. You'll just have to, be systematic in your approach to mixing the colors. I've also got some Bristol board over here on the side that I've taken a ruler to and a pencil and just marked a grid. If you're, again, trying to be systematic about it, it really helps. If you're doing this for a design project and each one of your color chips needs to be 1 inch, this is actually a 2-inch grid, so I can paint larger than 2 inches, larger than 1 inch, and then cut it down to 1 inch. Makes sense? Okay, so let's start in with our color mixing. I'm going to start with orange. Like I mentioned before, I've got a cadmium yellow. This is cadmium yellow medium, and you can see how much warmer it is than the lemon yellow or Hansa. Some manufacturers call it Hansa yellow. But cadmium yellow is much warmer and leans towards orange. So what I'd suggest that you do is get enough of that cadmium yellow, right? And I'm going to start with yellow-orange, right? It's the one right next to it here. Lay down some of that cadmium yellow. Again, a good idea to have your wet paper towel handy. Okay, so I'm trying to match my yellow-orange here on the color wheel. So I'm going to get a little bit of my warmer red, my cadmium red. This is cadmium red light. You might have cadmium red medium. Either one will work. Cadmium red light is a little more orangey. So I'm going to suggest that you start with just a little bit. And you'll notice I lay down the yellow first and quite a bit of it. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of the cadmium red. The cadmium red is stronger of the two in the mixture, so I use less of it, and I'm adding it to the lighter, weaker color, which is yellow. Okay. Now, I got pretty close on that first try, right? It's a pretty good match. I would suggest you go a little more conservatively than I have there, right? Add just a little bit of the red at a time until you get the color that you're looking for. I've had a little practice, so I kind of had a good idea of how much I would need. All right, so you're just going to continue like that to orange and red orange. Okay, so lay down a good deal of your yellow. Add a little bit of your cadmium red. So again, for oranges, cadmium yellows, cadmium red. Warmer yellow, warmer red. Try to use your palette knife to keep things in one place, kind of scoop it together. A lot of times the paint ends up looking like a finger rather than a puddle if you scrape it back together. So it's not quite dark enough. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that cadmium red. That's a little closer. Okay, and so let me clean my knife again. And finally, red orange. And the cadmium red light is almost red orange in and of itself, so I probably won't need quite as much yellow this time, but by comparison, you'll need more of the red this time to push it to a darker orange. All right, that's pretty close. All right, so let's talk about applying the paint. If you're, again, trying to create color chips for a color wheel, you're going to want to apply this as evenly and smoothly as you can with your brush. So I'm going to, again, recommend a smoother brush, a softer brush for that. Now, if you're an oil painter, you'll use a stiffer brush, typically, depending on what you're trying to do. But remember, it's a good idea to get your brush wet before you dip it into your paint. It'll make cleanup easier at the end of the day. And you're going to want to think about your color, mixture and how much water you add to it. Sometimes it's enough to just have your brush wet and dip into the paint and apply it. Other times you'll actually have to, add a few drops of water to get it to flow correctly. And it's really going to depend on your paint and your brush and the surface you're putting it on. But if I feel like, it's a little dry, I might dip the corner of my brush in my water just to loosen things up a little bit more. Notice I'm trying to load the body of the brush. I'm turning it over again and again. The brush is at a fairly shallow angle. Okay, so it's important that you take a look at the tip of the brush. You want it to be chiseled as you're doing this. And, as you go to apply this to your Bristol board, if that's what you're doing, you want to apply it at a fairly shallow angle, right? I'm just going to leave my brush fairly close to my work surface as I apply this. I'm turning the brush over a couple of times. I might go the opposite direction with the next set of strokes. So turn your brush over. All right, and so you want a smooth, even coat, as smooth as you can with as few streaks as you can. Now, before it dries, I'm going to turn my brush like this and tip it off. I'm just going to barely touch the surface of the Bristol board now, and I'm just very lightly brushing over the surface to eliminate as many brush strokes as possible. This is called tipping off the surface of the paint. Now you don't want to go to the point to where the paint is dried on you and you're still dragging a brush through dry paint. You need to know when to stop. And so it's going to take a little bit of practice to get this right. So my suggestion would be, until you really get the hang of this, it's probably a good idea to make a couple of paint chips for each of your colors. It's just going to give you some options when you go to cut these things out. So for my yellow orange, go back to my paint and make another one right here. Not enough paint, not quite enough water. Always keep adjusting. Paint can't be too wet or you'll start to buckle the Bristol board quite a bit, but it can't be too dry either. Now again, I'm tipping this off, turning my brush upright, and just very lightly raking it over the surface to eliminate as many streaks as I can. All right, so I would keep doing that with each one of these colors that I've mixed up. Remember, as you're working, it's probably a good idea to get your spray bottle out, hit your palette a couple of times, just to keep your paint from drying out. Of course, if you were using oil, no problem. It's not going to dry out on it anytime soon, but acrylic definitely will. Okay, so now I'm going to move through the rest of the wheel pretty quickly here. So I do want to talk about, say, mixing a red. There's not a real good kind of typical red here. If I wanted to, I could, however, take some of my cadmium and some of my magenta and mix them together to make a more typical red, right? That looks maybe more like, the red you'd see on a fire engine, right? So if you mix the two colors, your split primaries, your two reds, your two yellows, your two blues, you'll end up with a primary kind of right in the middle. Make sense? All right, so mixing up red-violet. Start with your magenta color. Some of you may have alizarin crimson, which is a little darker than this. This is what I'm working with is quinacridone magenta, but just about any paint with magenta in the name is going to work. Now, it's real important that you make sure that you don't overdo it with the blue. I think I might have gone almost too far with the blue, but that's still pretty red-violet, right? But I want to verify with my color wheel. It's a little on the dark side. And in fact, the magenta, again, it's pretty close to red-violet straight out of the tube. So it's not going to take much blue to move it where you need it to go. Okay, so now violet, somewhere in between red and blue, you're going to find that violet, right? And again, I'm using ultramarine blue to mix this. Blue is the strongest color on your palette, so it really doesn't take much to move it. There we go. It's a little deeper. And then blue-violet, again, lay down the weaker color first, which is going to be your magenta color, and then add blue to it until you get that deeper, richer blue-violet. All right. Greens can be tricky. Typically, the tricky thing with violet is it gets so dark that you can't see it. If you have some medium, right, some matte medium, you could add some of this to your violets. Makes them a little more transparent. So when you go to lay them down, if basically that medium is the same sticky binder that you already have in your tube of paint. And so when you add more of that clear binder, it lightens things up, right? The white of this paper underneath is coming through now. The thing is, if you do this and you lay it down on your Bristol board, you're going to need more than one layer of that for it to look solid, right? In painting terms, that's a glaze when you're adding more of the medium, the binder, to your paint. It makes it more transparent and you can see through it. That's called a glaze in painting terms. Okay, so to mix your greens, you want that lemon yellow, right? Or sometimes known as Hansa yellow. Again, when you look at your yellows side by side, one should be warm, one should be cool. Now, some of you may end up with a lemon yellow that leans warmer. If that's the case, your greens are going to be a little more muted. The pigment number on this, in my case, Hansa yellow, which is the same as lemon yellow, is PY3, pigment yellow number 3. That's what you really want, is that super pale yellow, because it will mix with your phthalo blue to make a really vibrant green. So once again, I'm going to start going lighter to darker, just a touch of that phthalo. That was a very small amount and it really moved that yellow. Now think about it. Yellow is always the weakest mixture on your 12-step color wheel, and blue is always the strongest, so it needs very little blue to move that to yellow-green. And again, compare it to your color wheel. Make sure you're as accurate as you can be. Once again, lemon or Hansa yellow, and then phthalo blue, and this is the phthalo blue that leans towards green. Don't accidentally get the phthalo blue that leans towards purple. It'll be called phthalo blue violet shade. You want phthalo blue green shade. It's pretty close. And then finally, blue green. Now, here's the thing about most standard color wheels that you can buy out there. Their idea of blue-green is a lot more difficult to mix with pigments. They're using a dye to create this, and to be honest with you, it's going to be really difficult to match, but you want to get as close as you can, as long as it looks blue-green when you're done. That's what matters. Okay, again, phthalo blue. Okay. You can see it leans more towards blue than the others do. And that's what you want. Even though, again, the color wheel itself is a much more turquoise type blue, this is about as close as we can get our pigments to that. You could go out and buy a tube of turquoise paint, but to be honest with you, like you'll use this green more than that one. You're going to go through and lay all of those colors down as you mix them onto your Bristol board. I just gave you a couple of examples, but you're going to do, like, as you mix them up, it's probably a good idea to lay them down right then. Okay, so let's talk about saturation. In this case, I'm going to create a saturation scale from orange to blue. Right, so I'm going to lay down some orange here and some blue. Now, the idea is that these are complementary colors. They sit opposite one another on the color wheel. They cancel each other out. They desaturate one another when they're mixed. Now, when you place them side by side in your artwork, they really vibrate. They're high contrast, right? When colors sit opposite, like orange and blue on the color wheel, sorry, can't see that, blue, orange, they're opposite, they're high contrast. But when you mix them together, they cancel each other out. So, for instance, what I want you to do is take some of that orange and make a muted orange swatch by adding a touch, not much, a touch of that blue to make a more muted orange. Now, one thing you got to watch, like if this ends up turning kind of greenish, more than likely I've got too much yellow in the mixture. Because think about it, yellow and blue make green, so if my orange and blue make a green, that means there's too much yellow in my mixture, so I'd need more red. Make sense? We're always dealing with the three primaries. Every one of these secondary colors and intermediate colors, also known as tertiary colors, it's always a combination of those three. So, if I've got green here accidentally, that means I don't have enough red in the mixture. Okay, so likewise, I'm going to take some of this blue here and take some orange to dull it, right? I still want it to basically look blue, but a muted version of it. And then finally, in the middle, what I want is a truly neutral color. Yeah, see, there's that green kind of showing up. I need more blue. My goal here is to have a color that doesn't lean towards orange and it doesn't lean towards blue. It should be neutral, right in the middle. It may take a little while to get where you want to go, but you should end up with something in between blue and orange. Truly neutral, right? And I'm not convinced that mine is perfectly neutral yet, but you get the idea. I would keep working with that, tweaking it with blue, tweaking it with orange, until it was really right in the middle, according to my eye. Okay, so that's your saturation scale. And like, here's a finished version, right? 12-step color wheel, vibrant color, and then a saturation scale over here that has each of the primaries with a little bit of the opposite added, and then a neutral right in the middle, right? So here's yellow with a little bit of violet added to it to make a muted yellow. Here's a violet, and there's its neighbor that's had a little bit of yellow added to it to neutralize it. And here's the neutral version right in the middle, as even as you can make it. You'll do the same thing between red and green, and like I just did, blue and orange. So there you have it. 12-step color wheel with saturation scales between the primary and secondary colors. It's a really good exercise, really important that you learn how to mix these colors. I want to remind you guys also that if you needed to mix, say, a muted green, you could, instead of using lemon yellow and phthalo blue, you could grab cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue. And that is going to create a more muted natural green. See that? In many respects, like for a landscape painting, this is going to be more practical than this super bright green. Right? So keep in mind, you're not always trying to mix these super vibrant colors. For the color wheel, yes, but in your life as a painter, oftentimes you're going to want to reach for the two colors that don't make the vibrant green, that make a more natural green or orange or violet, or any of the primaries or secondaries. Just keep your wits about you. Again, think about that. The split primary way of approaching this. You've only got 6 colors in your kit, but you can create a whole rainbow of colors from this. It's super practical, and really will solidify your knowledge of color mixing. Okay, good luck. Have fun.